Welcome to the May 2021 Planetarian Zoom seminar. And today we have Mike Askins and Toshi Komatsu from the De Anza College Planetarium. Remember that you should stay muted as usual, but also remember that if you have questions, and I'm pretty sure Toshi and Mike will accept questions anytime, is that correct? Okay, so make sure you unmute if you have a question, or you can put it in the chat. Okay, so without further ado, Toshi and Mike.
All right, well, good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be dialing in from. Appreciate Alan and the PPA for hosting us at this seminar, and appreciation to Carl as well, who I know is on the call, who encouraged us to give this talk. So, so hopefully people find it of interest. As Alan said, I'm Toshi Komatsu from the De Anza College Planetarium, and with me is my colleague and partner in crime for all of these field trips that we've been doing, Mike Askins. Mike, you want to say hello?
Hello. A pleasure to be with you today, and hope we can get some good exchanges in terms of the types of stuff that we've been doing and ideas that you have about what maybe you've been doing too. Go for it, Toshi.
So we wanted to talk a little bit. So those of you that attended the EWAC last year that was hosted by the Casper Planetarium, I talked about our plans for virtual field trips that we would be giving this year. So this is sort of a revisit of that program to talk about things that we actually ended up doing and some lessons that we had learned. We're going to give a little sample of an activity that we do with some of our younger students, and a little sample of how we do what we do. And again, hopefully we've left enough time at the end, so if people have questions, feel free to ask us. You can put them in the chat or raise your hand. We'll try to keep an eye on the chat as well, but if you have questions at any time, feel free to interrupt. Unlike the field trips, when we host them through the college, we usually make sure that no one can unmute themselves. We have to unmute them. Alan is a generous host and has allowed all of you the power to unmute yourselves. So we'll trust that all of you can behave. Some of you I know and I have questions about, but most of you, yeah. Most of you I think can behave enough, but why don't we go ahead and get started. And so I'm just going to share a little bit here of my screen here, using OBS so that people can take a look and see. That's what we use during our field trips as well. And so we're doing virtual field trips in real life, presented by myself and by Mike. Just looking at the numbers of the programs that we've done over the year. So we have our program breakdown, where we have 6 offerings that we created over last summer that were NGSS aligned. And just sort of a really brief recap from the presentation that I gave at the WAC is that what I did was I looked at all of the NGSS, the next generation science standards for those of us here in the US, looked at the standards that we had and tried to sort of group things by a few grade levels. So we made sort of a general show, one that was focused on K through 2, a couple that were focused on grades 3 through 5, and then a couple of shows that were geared towards grades 6 through 8. And so this is the breakdown of the number of shows that we've given over the past year since September. It was 93 programs in total starting in September. And this also includes the 2 last ones that we have scheduled on the books for next week. So you can kind of take a look at sort of what the distribution of what got booked for us. And we always had, except with, I think, 3 exceptions of those 93 programs, 2 presenters, myself and Mike. As far as the tech that we were using mostly Zoom. That was our platform of choice for presenting these programs. When we had to, we used Google Meet. We also made heavy use of Stellarium for Earth-based views of the sky. And then we also, because we have Digital Sky 2 from Skyscan, we use that for sort of space-based views, which sort of mirrors what we do in our own theater, because at De Anza College Planetarium, we do have an optomechanical star projector, as well as a full dome digital system. So it kind of mirrors what we were doing in our own theater, to have sort of the star projector would do, an Earth-based view, and then we have the full dome to show space-based view. So we sort of mimic that with the tech that we were using over virtual. And then again, controlling all of this through OBS, which several of you have been using, I know, and if you haven't been using it, I think most of us have at least heard of it, if you haven't been using it already yourself. Just to give you an idea of my layout when I'm using OBS, this inset here, this is what I have. I have two monitors that I use. This is everything that I put on my left monitor. So that has the Zoom interface so that I can see the students and whatnot. And then I have Digital Sky sort of running in a corner over here. I'll get to this window in a moment. This is just sort of the dual monitor setting for Zoom over in this corner. On the right monitor is where I keep all of the software that we're actually using. So you can see here that this window here is Digital Sky, along with the Digital Sky Navigator. Stellarium's in the background. And then when we're using our slides, I would have the slides also on this right monitor. So I'm using a lot of Alt-Tab to get in between the programs that I'm using, but they're all kept on the right monitor. The left monitor is the monitor that's directly in front of me, so that when I'm presenting, when I'm looking at participants or the chat that's ongoing, that's on the monitor that's directly in front of me. And so that's just kind of how I've laid out my monitors. Usually I'm doing all of the driving, all of the controlling with Stellarium and with Digital Sky. Mike's helping out with talking, so his setup for his monitor system is not nearly as complicated as what I have here. Let's switch back to just the slides here. Just a note on that window that I said I would get back to. I sort of rewatched the OBS tutorials that were hosted by Carrie Berglund with Digitalis that were done last month and the month before, and a couple other ones. And I hadn't seen anybody mention this particular feature of OBS, so this is just a quick plug for something that I find very useful. Is in OBS, if you use OBS, if you go to the view menu, there's an option for something called multi-view windowed, and that's what this window is, which gives you a sense of a preview of what you're streaming through Zoom or through Meet or whatever, and then what you're actually showing. That is not what I find useful. What I find useful is when you set up your scenes in OBS, this is a selection of the first 8 scenes that you have numbered numerically. So this is just in the list, the order that you have in your list. This is the first one, second one, third one, fourth one, etc. But this gives sort of a visual thumbnail for the scene that I want. And I know some people, they get pretty fancy with OBS, and they're sort of constantly changing their scenes or adapting their scenes. I went with just a particular set of 8 or so scenes that I use all the time. And so to have something that I could quickly switch between scenes so that I don't have to go to the list in OBS and read which one it is, depending on the name that I gave. It's sort of a nice thumbnail that I can see, and I can see that this one here, that's the Digital Sky one. I don't have to read that it says Digital Sky. I know it's the Digital Sky one, and I can just click on that and I go to Digital Sky. Or when I want to switch to Stellarium, again, I can see the Stellarium window. What I have down here, this is a view of, it's the view that I'm using now, actually, with it's me as an inset with the slides, which is what you're actually seeing right now. And then, which you can't quite see because I'm blocking it. And then this is Digital Sky with me as an inset, and Stellarium with me as an inset. So again, I can just sort of quickly go to them without having to scroll through the list and read what's in the list. I can just sort of see what it is. So I find that particularly useful. And if that's not a function that you are aware of in OBS, you may find it useful as well. So that's just a little quick plug on OBS and how I use it to switch between all the programs here. The plan that we had, and I'll just go back to just the view of the slides here, is that that I talked about in the e-conference, was that Zoom polls would give us a lot of real-time quality feedback. These are part of the plans that we had for how we're going to present our virtual field trips, that using Google Meet would be a fine alternative, and that we would have 3 to 5 time slots that we would offer per day. We would do that Monday through Friday. That's what we had planned. The reality was a little bit different. As planetarians, we all know there's what we plan, and then there's what actually happens. So what we found very quickly The problem with Zoom polls, even though I am a fan of polls personally, that their polls aren't repeatable, right? So if I'm doing 93 programs and I have a poll in each one, I can't just sort of copy one poll and get it into the next one. You have to do it sort of question by question. So that became not a practical thing that we could be doing. So we switched to just using Google Slides, and we embedded questions in there for and had people answer just through the chat. We found, yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think now you can actually import poll information using CSV. And so it's possible that we might have been able to do it. I think the bigger limitation, though, is it doesn't map over to Meet. The solution that we finally adopted was the one with the slides that works everywhere. So it was probably the right answer anyhow. But I throw that out there just because I noticed that recently.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mike. Other things we found, again, talking of Meet, is that I know Mike and I were not huge fans of Meet. Some of you may be using Meet, more power to you, but we don't like it just because we find that there's many more features that are available in Zoom that are just not available in Meet. And so we found that we liked using Zoom more, but for reasons that were at least first articulated to me by Derek Demeter, was that it's useful to have a background because some school districts were banning the use of Zoom because of security concerns early on. So some schools weren't able to use Zoom. So we had Meet as an alternative, and that worked out well enough that we could accommodate everybody using Zoom or Meet. But we definitely, in-house, we definitely had a preference for using Zoom. Moving on with the reality, we found that we were sort of on average doing 1 or 2 programs per day. Some days, it wasn't every day, Monday through Friday, but some days we would do, we did one day when we did 4 in a day. That was kind of a rare thing, but other days, we wouldn't have any, and then others we would kind of be scattered. So the number of programs that we did per week sort of varied quite a bit. Something else that we found was that Zoom acts very differently on Windows/Mac versus a lot of students were on Chromebooks, and that presented sort of a slightly different interface to Zoom. And then some people were on tablets like iPads and things. So in each platform, Zoom is acting a little bit differently, which caused a little bit of initial confusion. And there were some features that we wanted to use, like multiple spotlighting, or just being able to tell people where the reactions are, because they moved around. First they were on the participants window, and then they moved to the sort of the bottom of the main interface. But if you were on a Chromebook, it's still in the participant interface, and so things sort of moved around. So we had to be a little bit flexible. And the last thing that we've had to deal with a little bit more recently here is the hybrid classes, which at least here in California, a lot of the classes were online for most of this school year, but a little bit more recently, classes have started to come back in a hybrid fashion where some students are back in the classroom, some of them are still at home, some of them are in the classroom and they all have devices, so that even though they're in the classroom, they're logging in with their devices, and some of them there are in the classroom, but the teacher is projecting just on the main screen for the students. So all the programs that we developed, and Mike can speak to this as well, we tried to make them as interactive as possible, asking a lot of questions and asking for, again, having multiple choice questions that people could put in the chat. So we found when we moved, or when schools started to move to the hybrid model, or not everybody having their own device, it made it a little tricky because not everybody could respond in the chat with a reply. And so that proved to be a little bit of a challenge that we had to deal with.
And this is definitely, an ongoing research project, because it's only been in the last couple of months that a lot of teachers have been having these hybrid classes. And one of the things that they were doing was turning their camera, the teacher's camera, back toward the whole group. So we can at least still see like thumbs up and thumbs down and stuff like that. So I think as Toshi and I do more of these types of shows, and who knows, we may have a lot of them in the fall, just depending on how things go. we will get better at doing those kinds of shows because we just haven't had a lot of practice with it yet.
So that's just kind of a quick overview of some things that, again, we had planned with our virtual field trips, some realities that we faced when we started doing them, and some a little bit of our technique on how we're laying things out and the tech that we're using. We were going to switch over to giving an example of an activity that we do with the students. But before that, are there any questions from anybody about anything that either Mike or I have mentioned so far? You can either raise your hand or put it in the chat. Not seeing.
So the planetarium group seems to be very similar to the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th graders who don't seem to want to respond very much. And it's like pulling teeth to get an interactive show with older kids like that.
Well, I'll take it to mean that everything we just said was very clear and well understood by everybody. So, all right. All right, so why don't we switch over to giving a little sample of the type of program that we might offer. This was for younger students, sort of K through 2, maybe kind of something in that range. So if you could kind of put yourself in that sort of mindset, we'll switch over to the sort of thing that we, again, might do in one of our virtual field trips. So we would start off with a welcome slide here that has some of the sort of expectations for the meeting. Again, shout out to Derek Demeter, who this particular slide was modeled very heavily after information that he shared over last summer about things that he was sharing with his groups that were coming to see him. But normally we won't go through all of this, but normally we would, again, just set expectations. Again, we talked about earlier about how for that we don't allow the students to unmute themselves. So because we want to be able to call on them and to limit the use of chat to questions that we're asking and that sort of thing. Am I missing anything, Mike? Or
Toshi?
Yeah, Alan.
This slide is aimed at the adults, right?
It's aimed at everybody.
Yeah, what I was just about to say was this is the really adult version. So it's the highest end. The kids that we're going to be demoing on here is K, 1st and 2nd. And so we're not going to have them use the chat. And they probably can't even figure out how to use the reaction controls on Zoom. So they will end up raising their hands like this. We will unmute them when we see them, stuff like that. But yeah, that's a good point, is that this stuff is not expected to be read by kindergartners.
Yeah, I get your question now, Alan. Yeah, this is the sort of the full slide that we would use mostly, again, for the older groups. For the younger groups, I took this slide and I amended it. So I took out the stuff about the reactions and I took out the stuff about the chat. So mainly it was the information about keeping yourself muted and keeping your camera on so that we can see you when we're asking questions, so we could at least see them reacting with a thumbs up or thumbs down, or sometimes it was very emphatic, yes or no, or whatever else that they were doing, just so that we could see the audience. But yes, good points. Thank you.
Well, Toshi, shall we start from the beginning?
Yes. So
Okay.
Normally Mike would go over these rules and whatnot, and then we would turn it over to Mike to get us started. So floor is yours, Mike.
All right. So, well, I'll just sort of roll into it here. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the De Anza College's virtual planetarium. We're very excited to see you today. I'm very excited to be with you today, as well as my good friend Toshi. Behind me, you can see the campus of De Anza College. And if you were going to come into the planetarium today, you would be going into that little building right over there. Little tiny planetarium there. Now, a lot of you students probably haven't even been to the planetarium before. And that's okay, because the emergency will be over after a while and you'll be able to come and see us. My good friend Toshi is with us here today. Say hello, Toshi.
Hello, students. Very nice to meet you all, albeit virtually. Unfortunately, we aren't able to meet in the real planetarium, but hopefully someday really soon. If you've been to our planetarium before, you know it looks a little something like this. We have a beautiful star projector. It makes all the pretty stars above our heads. And again, unfortunately, we can't meet with you in person today, but someday, hopefully sooner rather than later. But back over to you, Mike.
Well, give me a thumbs up if you like space. Do you like space? I see lots of thumbs up. That's great. And I see a couple of thumbs down. That's okay. Everybody has to learn how to feel about planetariums in their own good time. And thanks, Carl, for sharing that too. We're going to be talking today about the moon and the stars. And we're going to be doing an activity that your teacher told you about to get some paper and something to write with. And I'll tell you how we're going to do that in just a little bit. But to get started, we're going to use a program that Toshi likes to use a lot, which is called Stellarium. It's a way of seeing the sky without actually going outside. And Toshi is setting it up there. Give me a thumbs up if you can actually see that on your screen there. Great. And you can see some stuff out there. Some grass is out there. I see some trees and stuff like that. The first thing we're going to try and do here is we're going to try and, I want to know, give me a thumbs up if you can see the moon. Can you see the moon? Ooh, a lot of thumbs up. That's great. There's the moon. Now, does this really happen in real life? Can you see the moon when it's still light outside? Give me a thumbs up if you've seen the moon in the daytime before. A lot of people have seen the moon in the daytime. That's right. Some students get confused and they think that maybe the moon is only visible at night, but it turns out that you can see it pretty much at any time during the day, just depending on the circumstances. So Toshi is showing us the moon there. Now, Toshi, this isn't the moon that we would see if we look tonight, is it?
No, Mike, this is the sky that we would see from Cupertino, where the planetarium is. In a couple weeks, it's June 13th, and it's just about sunset. Again, you can see that the sun has set here, so it's about 8:30. And what I'm going to do, like we can do in any planetarium, is I'm going to use the planetarium as a time machine and speed up time here so that we can watch as the moon starts to go down here. So you can see the moon moving, it's getting lower. Sometimes we say the moon is setting there. And we see the sun is disappearing as well. And we see some other stars there as well. And they're all kind of sort of moving sort of down and towards the right, heading over towards the horizon there. And what I'd like to do though is to go ahead and focus in on the moon. So I'm going to center on the moon. And what I'd like everyone to notice is the shape that the moon has here. As I take a look at the moon here, and I'm looking at just the lit up part of the moon here. To me, that reminds me of a banana. And maybe some of you, it reminds you of a banana too. Mike, what does it remind you of?
Well, Toshi, I like to see food up in the sky just like you. And this to me looks like the part of the cookie that I haven't gobbled up yet.
All right, so you've left just a little bit of that cookie. Is that for later, Mike?
A little tiny bit. That's right.
All right, so mostly eating cookie. That's there, and some of you students, I just noticed, have put in the chat that we've disabled, but some of you have figured out how to use it anyway and put in some other ways that we could describe the shape of the moon there. Benjamin says a croissant, and that's a good way to describe the shape of the moon. And some of you others, you can put in the chat, if the chat is working for you, how to describe the shape of the moon here.
You know, Toshi, there's been a lot of responses from students that we got very creative. Like they've said boats and canoes and smiles. And it's really fun to do this with the students because they come up with some really interesting stuff. And of course, it takes quite a while because we have to recognize that that's the student's hand is up. We have to go and unmute them. They have to figure out how to unmute themselves once we've given them permission to do that.
John Bell says it looks like a fingernail clipping. I've heard that one before as well. Someone once told me that it looked like a watermelon after you've eaten the watermelon. So it's just a watermelon rind that's left over there.
There's Benjamin's pet there. Looks like Cookie Monster. Oh, Cookie Monster. Thank you. Excellent. All right. Well, we'll see if I can find some other cookies up there in the sky a little bit later, Toshi. But before I get to that, let's go ahead and do the activity that I was telling you about with the paper. and the pen. What we want to do is I want you to draw a picture with your pencil or pen on your paper. We're going to draw 4 different pictures of the moon. And the first one I want to be this one that's the crescent moon that you're seeing right now. So why don't you go ahead? I'm going to turn on my doc cam here just to give you an idea of how I might do it. And hopefully you can see my doc cam there. I can't see you anymore. I'll just assume that you can. And I'll draw my first moon here. Now you can draw it any way you want to. In fact, I just drew a little tiny bit, but you can draw more than that if that's what you see. So let's see. So I'm going to unshare my screen. I wanted to give you an idea of what I was doing there. And let me go ahead and stop the share so that you can see what you need to see to be able to draw what you need to draw. And this is, I picked up my paper and I drew the little crescent moon there. You can draw it the way you want to. Maybe you can show the part that looks darker, but isn't completely dark.
And sort of breaking character for a moment and for this presentation. We do this with older students as well. And for older students, we might have them, encourage them to add a little more detail, like the Maria, or again, sort of draw out the darker side, even though you can't see it, but make sure that they sort of highlight the lit part, but again, add craters if they see them and the Maria and that sort of thing. But I think everybody gets sort of the idea here. I think we won't go through the entire rest of the program, but what we would do just sort of very quickly and for the purposes of this presentation is that we would be looking at the crescent moon, and then we would go ahead and skip ahead a few days, say about 3 days, 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 days here, have them draw out the quarter moon. Again, this is a time when we can see more Maria, see a little bit more detail. Skip ahead another few days to see the Gibbous Moon. There's an obligatory Gibbous joke, which Lawrence Hall of Science alumni probably. All right, Mike's had to hear it 93 times. He doesn't want to hear it again. And then before we get over to the full moon, and again, with each, we would pause at each sort of major phase and have the students draw the phase and have them hold up their pictures to the camera so that we can kind of see what people are doing. And some people get pretty artistic. Some people not as much, but some people do get very artistic.
Sorry, Toshi, one of the techniques that we stumbled onto while we were doing this is having the students make predictions about what the next phase is going to be using their hands. So, you get something like a half moon, something like this. You can certainly get the full moon, maybe a little bit of gibbous. Crescent is tough, but normally it's after the crescent that we do that. It's mostly just as an engagement tool. We had a lot of teachers who were concerned with the description of the show that we had given, that they had available to them, that there wasn't enough engagement. So they were concerned about that. We found that we were able to do enough to keep all the students, especially the young students, very engaged for the entire time, which, by the way, for K through 2, it typically ends up being about 30 to 35 minutes is about all they can take before the squirm factor becomes too high. Okay, so I guess we've pretty much done the moon then. Is that right, Toshi?
Yeah, so we were going to sort of move on to just a little sample of something that I did in Digital Sky. But before that, again, I'd like to pause for any questions from the group here about either that activity or other engagement strategies or things that you would like to share about ways that you've been engaging your audiences. I know, again, it's a clever group that we have here doing all sorts of wonderful things. So either a question or comment on interactivity. More Gibbous jokes in the chat. Now, Amy had them pretend to be astronauts around the 30-minute mark.
Oh, that's good. One of the other things, the engaging techniques that we have is everybody always likes it when all the constellation figures go on. That is a staple. And we have it in many of the shows. And especially, and if you would have seen the last half of this show, you would have also seen that part as well. But even though, and it's interesting because you can get a lot more feedback in terms of the interaction factor with the Zoom meetings than I've been able to do in the regular theater. And also students will do things like show you the book that they love about astronomy, and all kinds of things that you can't touch with the regular theater. So I think we've been able to fortify our toolbox with some extra stuff that even if you can't do it in the theater, I know our dean is interested in continuing these even after we're back to face-to-face.
I see that Guillermo has his hand up, so you want to go ahead?
Hi, Toshi. I'm sorry if I misunderstood. In the beginning, you said that you can't save the polls in Zoom. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it sounded like maybe Zoom has fixed that now. It was more so the question of that, you know, we had a particular set of poll questions that we would have for like one of the shows, like the K through 2 show. The next time we gave the K through 2 show, we would have, you know, a separate Zoom meeting with a separate Zoom ID and all that. And we couldn't find a good way to easily basically duplicate the poll from one Zoom meeting to use in the next Zoom meeting.
Yes, you can save a model of the meeting and with all the questions inside that. So
Yes.
when you schedule another poll, another meeting, you just choose the model. So you have all the poll, all the questions of the poll in it.
Yeah, the other thing that we found though too was, I think as Mike mentioned, is that sometimes we were doing these in Google Meet. So which, as far as I know, doesn't have a poll option. Maybe they do. I've just never looked into it. But again, it was a question of sort of how to transfer having questions in a poll-like format in a totally different platform. So for those reasons, we decided to just put the questions on a slide. That way we could show it either in Zoom or in Meet. And usually what we did is it was sort of a multiple choice slide with like 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. I think one time we had 6 options, but we would just have people put in the chat, you know, type in the 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So we kind of got around it that way. We don't get the nice, you know, numbers of, you know, the percentages that you get when you do a Zoom poll, but it was pretty easy enough to be just kind of glancing at the chat saying, oh, there's like a lot of 3s. Most people are voting 3. So again, we kind of went around it or got around it that way. So, Carrie?
Hello, Toshi and Mike. It's good to see everybody. I have kind of a procedural question. So you mentioned that sometimes the teacher turns their camera toward the entire class. And how do you handle it if you're having the student show off their drawings and they're all just in one little camera? Do they walk by and show their pictures, or do you just?
I don't see that. Yeah, good question, Carrie. I don't see that we're going to be able to do this anywhere near as interactively that way with a hybrid class as we, and I'll really miss that. Although we have had quite a few situations where all the students have Chromebooks, which have some drawback as it is, but at least you have that one-to-one connection that you would lose otherwise. And so I thought it was nice to at least be able to see some of the hands, and because otherwise it's really up to the teacher, and we tell them this the last few times that we tried to do this, that the teacher needs to be our conduit with the students if they just have a classroom full and a big screen, because we just rely too heavily on, you know, interacting to really make it as, we feel bad. They may not get it, but we, you know, it's frustrating because you don't feel like you've been able to do the kind of show that you want to do.
Yeah, we haven't come across this particular example of doing this particular activity with a hybrid class yet. So, but we are thinking about it. So, any other questions for us at this point? I was just looking at the chat, and it looks like John Bell has a activity, the Lost on the Moon, which he put in the chat. So thanks for sharing that, John. Appreciate that. I'll be sure to take note of that. So, all right. Well, that being said, so let me switch over to sort of the last demo bit that we wanted to do here, which was to talk about some things that we had done in Digital Sky. And obviously, Digital Sky is a system that we have in our own theater. So that's a system that we were adapting to use for our field trips as well. And of course, during the pandemic, this group is well aware that there was a special event that happened in December that got a lot of press. And we did actually have, out of those 93 programs, there was one special request that we got to talk about the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. So just sort of as an example of using Digital Sky, one of the things that I did, the other thing that I should mention is that one of the other things that I was doing with OBS and the Stellarium view is that, again, if you're familiar with OBS, you know that you can resize any window that you're putting in there. So one of the things that I did was I made the Stellarium window bigger so that there was, so it was kind of gave like a zoomed in look at Stellarium as far as being what was streamed out with Zoom. And that meant that some of the labels that show up in Stellarium could be a little bit bigger. So similarly for Digital Sky, when I share the view of Digital Sky that I have here, if you have used Digital Sky 2 before, what the program does is it outputs a square, you can't see me as I'm gesturing, it outputs a square window. So what I've done here in OBS is, again, just I'm sharing the window in OBS, but I've made the window larger than the canvas. So I'm just centered on the center part of that square. And that's one of the nice things about OBS is that you have a little bit more flexibility about how you're presenting the material rather than doing a straight screen share through Zoom. Because otherwise with a straight screen share, I could do a straight screen share of the Digital Sky output in Zoom, but it would be that square view, and then the labels, which are already not terribly large here, would be even smaller because, again, it'd be sort of a further out view. So that was one of the things that I really liked about using OBS for these, is that, again, there's just a little bit more flexibility in what we can show. And then we have reports too that things generally look a little bit smoother rather than doing the as far as like frame rate for animated things, especially when you're flying around the universe, that things look a little bit smoother when you're using OBS to share that rather than doing a screen share kind of thing. But this group is well familiar with the conjunction, so I won't go into a whole lot of detail. But what I wanted to do in that view that we did for this group that wanted to know about the conjunction was I started out with a view here of December 21st, but this is at the time, 3 years ago. This is 2017. And because what I wanted to show is where the planets are, so you can see where Earth is and Jupiter and Saturn. But as we run forward in time here to the present day, which is 2020, what I wanted to show was that Earth moves around in its orbit, Jupiter is moving slower, Saturn moving slower still, and that eventually as we approach the current day, which is 2020, Jupiter is kind of catching up to Saturn here. Again, I know this group is well familiar with that information. So, so I wanted to show sort of a top-down view of our solar system. And then I moved over to an edge-on view to show what that would look like off of Earth, but just sort of with so that people could see what that alignment looks like, even though we're off Earth. But the idea that it's sort of an edge-on view. So we get sort of that edge-on, where you can see they're kind of lined up, and then I had a button here to get us to zoom in closer so that we could see them all together. And again, just saying, imagining that if you were on Earth looking towards these planets, they would look close to each other in the sky. We did a preview in Stellarium what it would look like in the actual sky, but this is again sort of the space-based view. And then the last thing that I did for this particular sequence, again, doing a lot more explanation for a group that hadn't seen this before, but to take a look and see what happens the next time there's a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. So that's in the year, this is sort of just moving ahead a couple of years. Jupiter overtakes Saturn there, but when we get to the next conjunction, which is in 2040, the planets have to do this dance this is going to be another 20 years into the future. So Earth here is going to go around 20 times. Jupiter's going to go around. Saturn's going to swing around, not as many times, but eventually, again, Jupiter's going to catch up to Saturn. And once again, we'll get an alignment that we'll be able to see from Earth that coincidentally will be sort of similar in separation. Separation will be quite similar to what we had in 2020. So, but again, in this view, using OBS, it allows us to get sort of a closer view. Like my cursor, you can see disappears. I'm still pointing at digital sky up here, but you can't see because I've limited what you can see in OBS there. So that's just a little bit of digital sky. So using digital sky, we demonstrated all sorts of things. A lot of times what something that I like to do is I like to show particularly astronomical phenomena from different perspectives. So sort of a perspective from Earth and then a perspective from space and maybe a few different perspectives from space. So that was a nice thing about having multiple systems and not relying just on Stellarium or just digital sky, but to be able to go kind of back and forth to see their perspective multiple ways, which hopefully adds an understanding for the audience. It's a little tricky, as I'm sure we all found, to do that flat screen rather than being in the immersive environment that we're all used to in our domes. But we did the best we can, I think. Mike, did you want to add anything? Did I miss anything there?
Can't think of anything. It was nice to have your scripts there because it enabled us to show a different perspective of what we had seen. We'd spent the first 15 minutes of the show reprising the last few months where they were getting closer and closer and closer together. But I thought it was really nice to be able to change perspective and see the digital sky too.
All right. Well, I think that's just about all the content that we had. So I'd just like to go ahead and open it up at this point to any questions that you have about anything that we were doing, whether it's about OBS or again, interaction with the kids or anything else about the virtual field trips that we've been doing at De Anza College. So again, I'll open it up to questions. You can either raise your digital hand or put it in the chat, whatever's most comfortable for you.
Benjamin has his hand raised.
I want to say thanks. This is really great. And I wanted if everybody would, I don't know how this works actually, but if everybody will unmute and do an applause, more than just a symbol, but just actually go like this, see what that sounds like. Well,
It's not the sound that does it, but the
not like in person.
the visual made it for me.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
But I think Mike, you said Benjamin had his
That's
hand up?
right. We'll give his questions at the end of the talk.
So I have a whole list here. Some of them are just very quick answers, I'm sure. So on the Stellarium horizon with the trees, is that your own or did you use a built-in one?
No, that's the default. Well, it's not the default when you first load it up, but it's one of the ones built into Stellarium. It's not a new one.
It's either Garen's or can't remember the name of the other one. There are two that are very similar.
Garching, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's definitely one of those.
Someone could type it in the chat because I didn't quite make out the pronunciation. Thanks. So I noticed, I'm actually noticing a couple other things. Who's running this Zoom session, Alan?
Yeah.
So I noticed at one point in speaker view, it put Toshi and Mike side by side. Is that something you did or did that happen automatically?
Actually, Toshi and Mike are co-hosts, so they're controlling Spotlight and OBS and things like that. So Toshi could answer that, I think.
Yeah, so that was spotlighting. So what I did was I spotlighted both myself and Mike at the same time. Now oh, thank you, Carrie, for the proper spelling of the landscapes. But the spotlight and the something that I found out sort of much later was that if you're looking at a Chromebook the spotlighting doesn't work the same if you're looking on sort of a regular desktop, like on a Mac or on a Windows machine. Because I think on a Chromebook, it's a browser-based version of Zoom as opposed to like a separate standalone application. So just like if you end up streaming like a Zoom meeting to YouTube, I think it's the first thing that you spotlight is the only thing that gets sent to YouTube. And so the second spotlight, even though you might see it in your Zoom interface, this is your Zoom application, you won't see it in the web-based version of Zoom or on the like a streamed version. It's just whatever the first thing is. But if all your students are on, because Benjamin, I know you're at a college setting, if all your students are on, Windows or a Mac, possibly in Linux. I haven't tried it on Linux, but they should see it within the Zoom app. As long as they're using a standalone Zoom app and they're not on a mobile device, you can spotlight up to, I think it's 9 people simultaneously or 9 video feeds simultaneously.
You just can't count on it working. That's the only problem.
I'll let someone else jump in. I have a couple more questions, but I'll wait my turn again.
Well, I'll jump in if nobody else is going to. What's the biggest group you've done a virtual program for?
Biggest group.
Has it always been a single class or have been run?
No, we've done
combined?
multiple classes. Usually it's multiple classes. I think the biggest group we had was like 140, something like that, 150, something like that. Usually they're around 100 because it's usually, 2 or 3 classes plus some adults. So usually it's around 100, a little bit less than 100, but occasionally we got some larger groups.
And the problem with those, I mean, the dean really likes the big numbers, but it's unfortunate because it is true you can go to gallery view and you can page through, but it takes a long time to do it. And it's basically makes it, prohibitively expensive. And I think at one point we decided that we weren't going to have any that big, right, Toshi? Didn't we say we were going to keep it under 100 or something, or the dean wanted to charge more?
Yeah, so what happened was we had set sort of an internal limit of we wanted the field trips to be about 100 or less, but then we got a couple of bookings for more than 100, and I think our dean decided to charge more if the group was going to be larger than 110 or something like that. So so we made a price differential if it was going to be in an especially large group. Otherwise, we've been charging a flat rate. When we do in-person field trips, we charge per head. But for the virtual field trips, we were doing a flat rate for the booking of the field trip.
Yeah.
So I see John Erickson.
Yeah, can you clarify when there are multiple classes, are they from the same school or are you booking different schools together?
Yeah, we always booked a single school for the field trips, and they might bring multiple classes, but they're all from the same school. We didn't. We made a decision not to be mixing schools. For in-person field trips, well, we had mixed schools. We'll see if that's a reality once, we reopen. But as far as the virtual field trips, we decided it would just be simpler because we didn't know what rules people were going to have across the districts and things like that. So to keep it simple, we kept it to single school bookings, and they could bring multiple classes. And we had a few schools that brought multiple classes on multiple days. So we had a few schools that came multiple times, but it was always a single school.
So if you are doing like these 100-person classes, how do you make sure you're seeing the person who might be asking, raising their hand for a question?
Well, doing it for younger students is going to be difficult, but the older students, they know how to use the raise your hand in Zoom. So you can just sort of watch their hands go up, and it's a little easier that way.
But are you able to watch 100 people to see who's raising their hand? Because normally they're on different pages, right?
That's what I was trying to get at, was that the paging just really gets in your way. And you can't really effectively do it. And it's very disappointing that way. But for older kids, they can not only use the Zoom reactions, but they can also use the chat. And so you got it solved if they're, like 3rd or 4th grade and above. But below that is just a challenge sometimes.
And I think for a lot of the younger groups as well, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, they could at least use the raise hand function. So that was
Okay.
helpful. But yeah, not all of them. I did see in the chat, there's a question from Amy asking if we're getting local schools or from a much larger region that we ordinarily wouldn't visit you. The majority of our bookings were from local schools. We did get a few that were out of our region, but most of it was local schools. And that tends to be true of our in-person field trips as well. We don't do a lot of heavy marketing of our when we were doing in-person programs in the before times. But a lot of it was just sort of word of mouth. So we have a strong sort of local community connection. A lot of the local schools, they're aware of us. So a lot of them had mentioned that, oh, like we come every year. So, we were sad when the pandemic happened. So we were glad that you were doing this virtually so we could still do something. And a lot of them mentioned that, we knew, because we've been to the planetarium before, we knew that you were going to be doing a good program for us. So we weren't worried about that sort of thing. But yeah, the vast majority of our programs were local to our area. I think on a Facebook post, Amy, you were getting bookings from all over the country. So kudos to you being able to book all of those. I saw one from Northern California. It made me think, why didn't they book with us? They booked with Amy, but not with us. But yeah, definitely congratulations to you for being able to get the word out nationally.
We did get a few from Texas, right, Toshi?
Yeah, we got a couple from Texas. We got a couple from Southern California, but again, mostly just within the main Bay Area around us here.
All right,
Okay.
another technical
Still asking
question. When you zoomed in on the moon, Toshi, was that hitting the slash character, or did you do that manually?
I did that manually, so using the page up. And actually what I did was I used shift page up, it just makes it a little bit smoother.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Okay.
Yeah, I've gotten very, like I know a lot more Stellarium keyboard shortcuts than
Yeah,
I had ever
the more
known
you
before.
use it, the more shortcuts you know.
Yeah, so shortcuts definitely saved now. If I were more ambitious, I'd learn how to script into Stellarium, but but I'm not that ambitious.
And Mike, when you used your dock camera, did you explore alternatives to the dock camera, or that's what you had, that's what you used?
I have it for the academy classes, the K through 12 classes that we do in the summer. So that was just the one I used. Yeah, I'd be interested if people have other solutions. If they're interested.
Well, I have an Apple Pencil and an iPad, which I dial into the conference, and then I do a screen share, and they have the sketch pad, so to speak, which works great for me. But
well, one of the advantages of doing it this way is I can pick up the paper.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking also. That is nice.
So I could turn off my sharing and let Toshi have the bulk of the visual back. And that's really why I only actually draw once. And nobody nailed me on this, but I'll nail myself. I drew it before they drew it. And if there's a great way to quash creativity, it's to show them what you had in mind first. I try to be very simplistic about it so that I'm not giving a lot of details. And I'd be interested to hear anybody else who's got any similar thoughts in terms of, is it better to show it versus not show it at all? I mean, I could show it after they did it as well, and we hadn't tried that.
Mike, you could try drawing it wrong and ask him what's wrong with this.
That's an interesting point. Like a square cube or something.
I think the way you did it was pretty good. You made it simple and you invited them to draw it the way they saw it.
Yeah.
And I also wondered if you choose purple because of Harold and the purple crayon and the moon, or
No, this was the best pen that was left in the set. So that's why it got used.
I noticed in the chat, Carrie put in a question about if we've been having much technical issues. Bo Hartwig from Tyler, Texas, sets up a tech check with each teacher. We have had some technical issues. A lot of that has to do with internet. There were a couple times when I dropped off, so I had to sort of quickly reconnect. That's why it was actually helpful that there were multiple of us on the call. Besides Mike and me on the field trip, usually we have our admin person in the office who's the actual host of the program, and then Mike and me are co-hosts when we do the field trip. So we have multiple people logged in. I think the only times I got kicked off was when I was using Google Meet, which is probably another reason why I don't like Meet. That's again just my personal personal thing. But yeah, we had a few. Sometimes it was mostly just the internet connectivity, if the signal was weak, my Wi-Fi signal in my house, that sort of thing. But otherwise, it was pretty smooth technically, I think. Thankfully, got two more, so knock on wood.
Another question? Are we still going to be online in the fall? Is a question that just came in, Toshi, or a little bit earlier.
We will have to see. What we're planning to do in the very near future is send a survey out to our local teachers to find out what their sense of, are they going to be doing field trips in the fall? And things are starting to open up here in California, and at least locally in the Bay Area here, a lot of schools are talking about being fully in person in the fall. Which is good news on the one hand, but on the other hand, I don't know how much that extends to, being also willing to do a field trip to an external site, right? And having to deal with all that. So we will have to see. We definitely want to keep the virtual field trips as an option. We have a lot of what we call around here.
Oh, look at that.
He's frozen
God
looking at the
heard
sky.
him.
I like that.
Title I, just.
We
You
had-
froze there, Toshi.
Oh, well, lo and behold, internet connection unstable.
It does happen.
Yes, it does happen.
So yeah, I think you were about to say, Toshi, that we're definitely interested in continuing to have the online shows so that we can offer a reduced rate for schools that are having trouble getting buses and things like that. Because they work really, they work fine for situations like that. And but whether or not that'll be our mainstream, we just don't know yet.
Yeah, it's still an open question as to, again, whether or not schools are interested in doing an external field trip, like going to another facility. Will they be willing to, go and to have, like I said, during our in-person field trips, a lot of times we would have multiple schools, like we might have 2 or 3 schools together. Are they willing to do that? Or are we going to have to, again, limit it to a single school? So these are things that we're still discussing now, so.
Do you use student presenters at all in the system, or did you train them to do the virtual programs maybe?
We haven't done that in the past, not at De Anza. Usually it's me or Mike and me, or some combination of me, Mike, and we have one other part-time presenter that helps with the public shows that we do on Saturdays, that we used to do on Saturdays. And yeah, so we have 2. So occasionally, if like either Mike or I were sick, we might have them come in to help cover, or but they aren't students, so we haven't looked so much at using any of the students at De Anza. Do we know if De Anza will be open in the fall? And again, still an open question. It kind of depends on what the community wants. So again, in addition to surveying the local schools to find out about field trips, we also want to send a survey to just the community in general to find out if they're interested in, if they're going to be willing to come to a theater and sit amongst, people of unknown vaccination status in a closed room for any length of time. So we're going to survey our community and find out what they want. Because if we get a bunch of responses like, yeah, we're not comfortable with going into a theater, then we're not going to reopen. But if we get a large clamoring from the public, it's like, yes, open up and we will come, then we'll do that. So what we're doing is we're trying to plan as best we can so that when we decide on an open date, we can quickly pivot to it. And it's not going to say, well, okay, we're going to plan for an open date in 3 months and then find out in 3 months, oh, cases have spiked and we can't do it. So we're trying to be flexible, but we don't have a hard opening date yet. All right. Any last questions from anybody? All right, well, I would just put up our contact info here in case anybody needs it. But it's our address is at deanza.edu. That's our website. But thank you everybody for your time and attention. Again, thanks to Alan for hosting and PPA for the planetarium Zoom session here, and hope everybody has a great afternoon. And thanks for joining us on a Friday. So
Thank you, Toshi. That's great. Great.
Yay.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thanks to both of you. That was really, really, really nice.
you're very welcome.
Now, I think Toshi said he needs to run off. Has another. He's booking himself tightly these days.
Yeah. So
This apparently is Mary from Cal Academy. She came in briefly and then left.
All right. So yeah, so I do have to run, but I know folks sometimes like to hang out and chat. Unfortunately, I can't today, but have a great weekend, everybody, and hope to see a lot of you in person sooner rather than later. So take care, everyone, and stay
Doing
safe.
this, Toshi. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks, Toshi.
No problem.
Bye.
Good.
Bye.
Yeah, Mike, it was really good to see what you guys are doing because I've been very curious, and that was a nice presentation and nice to kind of be able to sit in on that virtual field trip.
No, I appreciate
How that works.
the idea, Carl. It was a good idea. And it's, gosh, I don't remember seeing you for quite a while. So it's nice to see you too.
It has been a while.
And you've got your tech working so that I never imagined you being in Zoom meetings because your
Yeah. I've been
your
doing a
tech
few.
is so classic.
Yeah. Well, I've tried to join you guys on your virtual star parties,
Oh,
and I missed the last one. And then, of course, you've been fogged out, I know, a couple times too.
Maybe that's going to be another Zoom seminar, how to do virtual star parties.
Yeah.
I think does Adam Fans, is he the one who does those in Tennessee? I mean, there's
I
one
think
other
he does
place I heard
some.
of it.
Derek Demeter does.
Demeter, that's it.
Yep. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But not too many people do the virtual star parties, but Mike and Toshi do that too.
And very popular too. You got a lot of
Yeah.
people.
well,
Yeah, I did one of those that Derek had put together. It was a lot of fun.
they're very popular, and what you get helped by YouTube because YouTube is really pushing their live events. So it turns out that you get a lot more traffic for your live events than for your regular just recorded events. And that isn't just because everybody thinks that live is better. I better go to that. But it's because people who wouldn't even know about it are told there's a live event starting now, and they go in. It changes the character of your audience sometimes. But it is kind of nice if you're looking for numbers. we just to let people know sort of what we did. Alan is the proud owner of an EV scope, and so he volunteered to have us do a show with him. Unfortunately, both the times that we tried to do it, he was a trooper too, and came back a second time, even when the weather didn't work out in Berkeley. And but we still got a lot of good feedback from the show because we recorded some stuff earlier in the week when we found out that the weather wasn't going to be all that great on the Saturday. So
Yeah.
I was disappointed because I thought, man, watching the images come in and get better and better and better, that's a pretty involving, engaging thing. And to not have that part and just to show pictures of when you know, here it is 2 minutes later, and then here it is 3 minutes later. But I was wrong again.
Well, it did turn out well, but you know, it's another case of if you want to make sure to have cloudy weather, then plan a star party.
There you are.
While we're talking about telescopes, did anyone ever take advantage of the SLU IPS relationship? Can't hear you.
We did. We have almost nobody in our little club, and the people who are there aren't active. But it has been good just to use SLU for the telescopes, you know, because we can watch the picture come in and get better and better, and then add color. And you know, if we're doing a talk that is like the sky this month, we can choose things that are going to be in the sky. It's a little bit difficult just because of like, if we want stuff that's going to be up around like 10 p.m. or midnight, it's not available for us like live because it's Chile and the Canary Islands. They're so far ahead of us. So
where are you, Katie?
We're in Washington. So there's a pretty big time difference. So it can be a little bit frustrating. It's like either it's not early enough in the Canary Islands if I'm like, I want this planet while it's rising. It still hasn't risen yet, but then it's also too late to get anything that's going to be like front and center in the sky at the time when most people are going to be looking at it. But, you know, we've still gotten some really good stuff. I'm planning on doing a Messier objects talk in June, and we're definitely going to take advantage of the SLU telescope system to do that.
You don't have to worry about presenting it at a time when your audience is doing other things like going to sleep.
No.
Did you ever do it like during the day time? Maybe you have a problem getting people to do that.
We haven't. So the Canary Islands scope comes on for us at around like 1 p.m. Pacific. So there's that, but we've been doing our talks on 6 p.m. on Thursdays. So it's not a Friday where people have stuff that they're doing, like if they're starting to go out again. But it's late enough that, you know, it might either be before dinner or somebody's already eaten dinner. And so hopefully it's kind of like a clear time in people's schedule. We've definitely had a drop off in the number of people who come by and watch us, but we do get like a small crowd and some returning people. The people in our community have enjoyed that we've kind of kept something up.
Well, I just noticed I didn't stop the recording, so I'm going to stop the recording now.